Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament as MPs take the first parliamentary step on the road to Brexit.
Ayes to the right, 498. The noes to the left, 114. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it.
At Prime Minister's questions, Jeremy Corbyn demands Theresa May retract her invitation to Donald Trump to come to the UK and meet the Queen.
Just what more does the President Trump have to do before the Prime Minister will listen to the 1.8 million people who've already called for his state visit invitation to be withdrawn?
But Theresa May rejects that call and says Labour has nothing to offer the UK.
He can lead a protest. I'm leading a country.
And in a debate on the damage done by drinking, a former minister talks about growing up as the son of an alcoholic.
I know what it's like to feel that cold nausea when you find the empty bottles hidden around the house.
But first, the result was never in doubt, but there was still a sense of drama in the Commons when, after 2 days of debate, the moment finally came for MPs to vote on the bill, allowing the government to trigger our exit from the EU.
The ayes to the right, 498. The noes to the left, 114.
The ayes to the right, 498. The noes to the left, 114. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it.
That result was the culmination of a process started when the government's plan to trigger Brexit without Parliament's consent was challenged in the courts. Judges ruled that MPs and peers should have a vote before ministers began the formal divorce proceedings. And so 2 days were set aside for debate on a bill to trigger Article 50. And in total, nearly 200 MPs had their say over 18 hours of debate in the Commons chamber.
It's not a bill about whether the UK should leave the European Union or indeed how it should do so. It is simply about Parliament empowering the government to implement a decision already made, a point of no return already passed. We asked the people of the UK if they wanted to leave the European Union. They decided they did. So at the core of this bill lies a very simple question. Do we trust the people or not?
I hope the respectful approach that I've tried to adopt to colleagues and to the anxiety among the 48% is reflected across the House, and that we will see a good deal less of the gloating from those who campaign to leave than we've seen in the past. It is our duty to accept and respect the outcome of the referendum, but we remain a European country with a shared history. Above all, it is our duty to ensure an outcome that is not just for the 52% or the 48%, but for the 100%. That we will do.
Apparently you follow the rabbit down the hole and you emerge in a wonderland where suddenly countries throughout the world are queuing up to give us trading advantages and access to their markets that previously we've never been able to achieve as part of the European Union. Don't let me be too cynical. I hope that's right. I do want the best outcome for the United Kingdom from this process. No doubt somewhere there's a hatter holding a tea party with a dormouse in the teapot.
This is a big deal. You're not just divvying up the Nana Mouskouri records here or divvying up the Borgen box set. This has an impact on each and every one of us. Europe is where our future lies. It's one where we tackle inequality, climate change, refugees get help, areas that don't get much of a hearing in Whitehall these days. Pooling our sovereignty and working together is a good thing. Passing this bill and turning your back on our amendment would turn its back on the progress made and disrespect the devolution settlement.
The British people gave the government the mandate to pull the United Kingdom out of the European Union. The British people, no, I want to make some progress. The British people did not give this government the mandate to threaten to turn our country into some tawdry, low-regulation, low-tax cowboy economy. And the British people most certainly did not give the mandate to the government to indulge in this ludicrous, sycophantic farce we've seen in recent days, in which this government, having burnt every bridge left with our friends in Europe, rushes across the Atlantic to sidle next to a US president who they don't seem to be aware, whose nativism, whose isolationism, whose protectionism is diametrically opposed to the long-term strategic interests of the United Kingdom.
A Labour MP was one of those who defied her party's leadership and said she'd vote against triggering Article 50.
Some have been victims of racism and hate crimes, like my friend Suzanne, who came to Cardiff from Germany, and has a young daughter, Lilith, who is in primary school, who have been spat at and told to go home, and had bricks and stones thrown at them in the street. And this is the climate that they and we are living in.
But other MPs welcomed the bill and the decision to leave.
Those who wanted to vote to remain tried to scare the devil out of them when it came to the vote. They told them all kinds of horrors were going to beset them, that within a couple of days they were going to be eating bread and dry and having to drink water and lose their jobs. And still they voted to leave.
I would caution those thinking of voting against tonight to be careful what they wish for and to be careful for wishing for second referendums. I think the people, advocates of free speech and free press and a powerful democracy, would view their wishes dimly.
This is the moment we begin to take back control of our laws, our borders and our money. Once again, we become a sovereign nation-state in command of our own destiny, and I am absolutely delighted about that.
At the end of that epic debate, MPs rejected an SNP amendment attempting to block the bill and passed it by a majority of 384. 47 Labour rebels, the SNP, the Lib Dems and the former Conservative Chancellor Ken Clarke all voted against. The bill will now reappear in the Commons on Monday to begin its detailed consideration. Well, the next day, the government published its 75-page Brexit policy document, laying out what its objectives are in the forthcoming negotiations on extracting the UK from the European Union. There were few surprises, as the principles were contained in the Prime Minister's keynote speech last month. The Secretary of State said it confirmed the Prime Minister's vision of an independent, truly global UK.
I've said at this dispatch box before, there'll be any number of votes on substantive policy choices. To that end, the White Paper makes clear that we expect to bring forward separate legislation in areas such as customs and immigration. Delivering a smooth, mutually beneficial exit, avoiding a disruptive cliff edge, will be the key. Whatever the outcome of our negotiations, we seek a more open, outward-looking, confident and fairer UK that works for everyone. The White Paper is available on the government website, and I've arranged for copies to be put in the library of both houses.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, normally I would thank the Secretary of State for early sight of his statement, but this statement says nothing.
He repeated a demand for a vote in the Commons on the final deal between the PM and the EU.
Otherwise, all honourable members will have to watch on their screens as the European Parliament debates our deal before we get to express any views on it. That is completely unacceptable, and it's demeaning of this House.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, before the big vote on Wednesday night, Theresa May had faced Jeremy Corbyn for the regular round of Prime Minister's questions. The Labour leader pressed the Prime Minister over her recent visit to the US and meeting with President Trump. Theresa May was the first overseas leader to meet Mr. Trump. The pair discussed NATO and trade before giving a joint news conference. Just hours after Mrs. May left Washington, the President announced a ban on people from 7 mainly Muslim countries travelling to the US.
Mr. Speaker, Downing Street has not denied that the Prime Minister was told by the White House that the executive order on travel to the US was imminent. So let's be clear, was the Prime Minister told about the ban during her visit, and did she try to persuade President Trump otherwise?
If he's asking me whether I had advance notice of the ban on refugees, the answer is no. If he's asking me if I had advance notice that the executive order could affect British citizens, the answer is no. If he's asking if I had advance notice of the travel restrictions, The answer is we all did, because President Trump said he was going to do this in his election campaign.
President Trump has torn up international agreements on refugees. He's threatened to dump international agreements on climate change. He's praised the use of torture. He's incited hatred against Muslims. He's directly attacked women's rights. Just what more does President Trump have to do before the Prime Minister will listen to the 1.8 million people who've already called for his state visit invitation to be withdrawn?
The Right Honourable Gentleman's foreign policy is to object to and insult the democratically elected head of state of our most important ally. Let's just see what he would have achieved in the last week. Would he have been able to protect British citizens from the impact of the executive order? No. Would he have been able to lay the foundations of a trade deal? No. Would he have got a 100% commitment to NATO? No. That's what Labour has to offer this country. Less protection for British citizens, less prosperous, less safe. He can lead a protest. I'm leading a country.
Theresa May. Well, staying with the fallout from Donald Trump's travel ban, the Home Secretary Amber Rudd told MPs on the Home Affairs Committee it could create a potential propaganda opportunity for so-called Islamic State.
ISIL and Daesh will use any opportunity they can to make difficulties to create the environment that they want to radicalise people, to bring them over to their side. So it is a propaganda opportunity for them, potentially. At the moment, what we will do is continue to monitor what is said, continue to take down the sort of literature and postings that we see on the internet that try to encourage that sort of extremism. They may use this as an example, and we will continue to monitor it and take down the sites where we can.
The next stage in the plan to expand Heathrow Airport is underway. In the Commons on Thursday, the Transport Secretary launched a 4-month consultation and set out planning and infrastructure proposals. A Liberal Democrat was just one of the MPs to raise concerns about air quality.
Will he explain what he will do if the airport cannot be delivered within legal air obligation limits? Proceed anyway, change the air quality objectives, or pull the plug on the runway?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very clear the airport will not be able to secure its development consent order if it cannot demonstrate its ability to meet those targets. But of course, some of the things we're consulting on today, Mr. Speaker, for example, smarter use of airspace, one of the things we will be able to achieve through airspace reform and through the technology that's now available to us is to avoid, to anything like the degree we experience at the moment, planes stacking over the southeast of England, emitting additional emissions into the atmosphere, using up more fuel. That's one of the benefits that comes from smarter use of airspace that will help contribute, as will cleaner, newer generation, more fuel-efficient aircraft that we will see, I think, extensively in this country over the coming years.
The Chief Inspector of Prisons for England and Wales, Peter Clark, says many of his reports are falling on deaf ears. He told the Justice Committee that jails which did not put his recommendations into practice often failed to improve or even went into decline.
In 60 seconds, tell me what's wrong with our prisons.
Basically, they're unsafe, they're full of drugs, we have an ageing population, the physical environment is appalling, and there are far too many people in our prisons who are suffering from mental health issues. And in my judgment, those 5 issues will create a major obstruction to the reform programme.
Mr. Clark, so who's holding up this reform? You've identified the problems, you have talked about what needs to be improved. Where is the block in the system that prevents the changes that needs to be made?
Well, in terms of those issues which I've mentioned, they're issues which we frequently refer to in our reports. And if I have a frustration, it is that far too often our reports, it feels as if they're falling on deaf ears. And not in all prisons, but in some. And typically the prisons which do not respond positively to our reports, where there's a hugely low uptake or implementation of our recommendations, are those prisons which do not improve or which actually decline in the way in which they treat prisoners and the outcomes that prisoners encounter in those prisons.
The government's being urged to do more to secure the release of a British-Iranian woman, Nazanin Zaharie-Ratcliffe, being held in Iran with her baby daughter. A charity worker has been accused of security offences and was detained while trying to leave the country after visiting relatives in April. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, who's from London, said his wife's detention was a stain on Iran, and her family denies she's broken any laws.
Here we have a young mother, a British-Iranian citizen, imprisoned after visiting her family there with her daughter. And her daughter is solely a British citizen. Surely the time has come for the UK to call for Mrs. Zaharie-Ratcliffe's release before she, her little daughter and her husband, here today with his own mother, suffer further.
My lords, the suffering of the family can barely be imagined. And we should, throughout all this, regardless of some of the extraordinary claims made on the internet, we should remember that this is a loving father who simply wants his family to be reunited. And I wholly respect that. That's why, my lords, we are urgently seeking information on what further legal avenues are available to Mrs. Zaharie-Ratcliffe, and undertake the FCO will continue to offer support to the family, both here in London and Tehran.
Now let's go back to Brexit. The former UK ambassador to the EU, Sir Ivan Rogers, made the headlines in December after the BBC reported his private remarks to the Prime Minister about how long Brexit negotiations could take. Sir Ivan stepped down last month, and in his resignation letter he told officials to challenge muddled thinking in the Brexit process. Now, in his first public appearance since his resignation, he's told the European Scrutiny Committee that Brexit negotiations could be difficult.
This is going to be, on a humongous scale, going to have enormous amounts of business running up various different channels, and then involve difficult trade-offs for Her Majesty's government and difficult trade-offs for the other 27 on the other side of the table.
Sir Bill Cash asked him about an assertion in the letter last October that exit negotiations could take 10 years.
You said that it was going to take 10 years. Can you confirm whether, in fact, you actually said that? Or was that meant to be, was it a leak? Was it an intention that you thought to be able to get across a message without anyone really knowing quite where it came from? I mean, can you give us a bit more information on that?
I can indeed. I never said it would take 10 years.
Is this reporting by the BBC based on off-the-record remarks and observations that you made to them?
No.
It isn't?
No.
Where do you think it came from?
I've no idea.
We hear threats, and I can only assume they are threats. That's how I interpret them, of having to pay billions of pounds or euros to leave this club. Well, so far as joining a club, you pay a membership fee, then you pay every year to be a member, and then you leave. You don't pay to leave a club. You say, thank you very much indeed, and you head off. So do you think this is a genuine and real threat to us to pay all these billions of euros to a club that we're leaving, or do you think that's an unreasonable request to make at this stage?
I think it can be both genuine and unreasonable, if I may say so. I think it is genuine, and I hear it repeatedly and have been reporting it for months.
He called it a predictably very hard line coming from the EU Commission and from some member states. And staying with Brexit-related committees, the International Trade Secretary told MPs that the UK is already having talks over potential trade deals with countries including Australia, China and India. Liam Fox told the Commons International Trade Committee that the new trading relationships could not be a substitute for the EU's single market, but he hoped they would be in addition to a free trade deal with the remaining member states.
In terms of Australia, we have an Australia-UK trade working group. In terms of China, we have a trade working group, and I'm chairing the Joint Economic and Trade Committee in Beijing in April. With the collection of Gulf states, we are working with them to determine what our relationship would be, given that they are keen on our potential future FTA. With India, we've got a joint working group. I chaired the last JETCO in Delhi, and we have embarked on a process of trade audit.
If you were to add up all of those potential countries, the level of exports that you've been talking about, all the lists that you had there, it doesn't come anywhere near the level of exports that we have to the EU.
Well, I'm sure former Chief Secretary is well aware that adding up lots of small numbers gets much bigger numbers in the end. And of course, it's not an either or. We're not looking here at we either trade with the EU or we trade with everybody else.
But it's not a substitute, is it? It can't substitute for our trade with the EU.
No one has said it's a substitute.
Right. Your department issued a press release at the beginning of the year. DIT secures over 16 billion of foreign investment. The Financial Times went through the lists that you had here. In fact, most of those had been already secured long before the referendum. Fake news?
It's the continuity of what UKTI, now ITI inside the department, is doing. And it was an antidote to the idea that people are not going to be investing in the United Kingdom. I've just been in Qatar and will be chairing the UK-Qatar UK investment conference in March, where I expect a large amount of foreign investment.
You regret the title to your press release, because it wasn't really your department that secured that 16 billion.
I don't regret it at all. I think the more good news we give to the public, the better, and it counters some of the black propaganda that comes from those who still want to undermine the referendum.
Liam Fox. The government's been told to rethink its alcohol strategy and bring in a minimum unit price for alcohol in England and Wales. The call came from across the chamber as MPs debated ways to tackle the harm caused by drinking. One MP focused on the damage done when pregnant women drank, revealing his own adopted children were both affected by a condition called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The debate was opened by the chair of the all-party group on alcohol harm.
There are currently over 10 million people drinking at levels which increase their risk of health harm. Among those aged 15 to 49 in England, alcohol is now the leading risk factor for ill health, early mortality and disability.
MPs turned to the impact of drinking during pregnancy, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or FASD.
As an adopted parent, I discovered just how common this is amongst children who are adopted, including amongst my own two children, and I should declare that interest. I first became aware of this. Yes, of course.
I don't know if you can recall when we were receiving evidence in our all-party group about the impact of fetal alcohol syndrome on adopted and foster children, that one survey done indicated that of the cohort of adopted and foster children who were assessed, up to 70% of them were affected by this syndrome.
A Labour MP and former minister had spoken previously about growing up with an alcoholic father.
I know what it's like to feel that cold nausea when you find the empty bottles hidden around the house. I know what it's like to feel sick when you hear your parent being sick first thing in the morning because they've drunk too much.
He said the children of alcoholics often fell through the gaps in provision. The Shadow Health Minister said his alcoholic father had moved to Thailand and not come back to the UK for his wedding, later dying in the country.
His friends that he'd made over there told me he was drinking a bottle of whiskey a day over there. They told me he couldn't come to the wedding because he didn't want to embarrass me. And that was... I'll always regret that. So, look, I'm the Shadow Health Secretary. I'm going to do lots of criticising the Tories because that's my job. But can I say to the Minister, I will work with government to put in place a proper strategy for supporting children of alcoholics on a cross-party basis, because, quite simply, 2 million children are suffering. Let's send them a message that they should no longer suffer in silence.
The Minister said there were grounds for optimism.
People under 18 are drinking less, and attitudes are beginning to change. And there has been a steady reduction in alcohol-related road traffic accidents.
There was more to do, she said, but she took courage from the day's debate.
Great social change requires three things, I think. It requires long-term political will, it requires non-partisan partnership, and it requires bravery. And I've heard all three of those today. And I hope that each member who has spoken here today will continue to work with me as we fight on to tackle this social injustice. Thank you.
The Health Minister, Nicola Blackwood. And that's it from me for now. But do join Joanna Shin on Monday night at 11 for another roundup of the best of the day here at Westminster as MPs begin their detailed debate on the bill triggering the start of our exit from the EU. But for now, from me, Alicia McCarthy, goodbye.